Her hands trembled as cruel voices echoed around her, stripping away not just her dignity, but her very soul. For years she endured humiliation in silence, crushed beneath the weight of her in-laws' cruelty. But on this night, when they went too far, one man stepped out of the shadows, a lone rancher with eyes that burned like fire. And when his voice thundered through the darkness, 3 words changed everything. Enough is enough. What followed was a battle not just for her freedom, but for her soul itself, a fight that would test courage, awaken buried scars, and prove that even in the deepest night, hope can rise again. The wind howled across the dry plains, rattling the wooden shutters of a small ranch house on the edge of a forgotten town. Inside, a woman sat on the cold floor, her body trembling, not from the chill of the night, but from the wounds that ran far deeper than skin. Her name was Eliza. Once, her laughter used to fill these walls, but now silence clung to her like a shadow. Her in-laws had made sure of that. They treated her not as family, but as a burden, an outsider who never deserved their son, and when fate snatched him away in an accident, they unleashed a cruelty she could never have imagined. Every day, they stripped her of something precious, not just food or shelter, but dignity. They sneered, mocked, and humiliated her in front of neighbors. But tonight, they had gone further than ever before. They had tried to break her spirit completely, ripping away her last shred of respect in front of others, leaving her soul raw and wounded. Eliza's hands clutched her dress tighter, as if holding on to what little of herself was left. Out in the distance, hooves struck the earth with force, echoing like thunder rolling across the barren land. A lone rancher, hardened by years of solitude and loss, rode into town. His name was Daniel Hayes. To most, he was nothing more than a rugged drifter, a man who kept to himself. But those who looked closer saw a storm behind his quiet eyes, a man who carried wounds of his own, scars no one spoke of. Daniel had buried too many memories under the soil of his ranch, and yet something in him was not dead. Something restless as he passed through the dimly lit street. He caught sight of a crowd outside the old farmhouse. Torches burned low, faces twisted with cruel amusement. Daniel slowed his horse. He didn't belong in their affairs, and yet something compelled him to stop. He dismounted, his boots crunching on the dirt as he drew closer. That's when he saw her. Eliza stood in the center, eyes downcast, shoulders hunched as her in-laws hurled insults, each word like a lash across her spirit. They spoke of her as though she were nothing, as though she deserved every humiliation. Daniel's jaw tightened. He saw the way she clung to herself, the way her breath shook, and in that moment, something inside him snapped. Her eyes lifted, just for a moment, and they met his. It was only a second, but it was enough. He saw in her gaze the silent cry of a woman begging to be saved, the last flicker of hope before darkness consumed her. Daniel clenched his fists. He had walked away from battles before, telling himself they weren't his to fight. But this was different. He stepped forward, his tall frame cutting through the crowd. The murmurs quieted as the ranchers' presence demanded attention. The in-laws turned, scowling at the interruption. "This isn't your concern," one spat, trying to wave him off. Daniel's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of thunder. "It is now." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Daniel's reputation was known, even if he kept to himself. He was the man who had once fought wolves bare-handed to save a herd, the man who survived when others didn't. His silence had always been his shield, but now his voice rang out with unshakable authority. Eliza's brother-in-law stepped closer, puffing his chest. "She's ours to deal with. You got no right stepping in." Daniel's eyes darkened. "No one has the right to destroy a woman's soul." The words cut sharper than any blade. For the first time, silence fell over the mob. Eliza's heart pounded. No one had ever spoken for her before, not once. She had endured every cruelty alone, swallowing her screams, burying her tears. But now, this stranger, this lone rancher, was standing between her and the people who had stolen everything from her. The brother-in-law snarled, grabbing Eliza's arm roughly, as if to prove his control. She winced, her body trembling. That was when Daniel's voice erupted, powerful and fierce, shaking the very ground beneath them. "Enough is enough!" he shouted. The words roared like a storm, echoing off the wooden walls, rolling through the night air. His fists were clenched. His chest heaved with fury, and his eyes burned with a fire that none dared challenge. The crowd stepped back, startled by the force in his tone. For a moment, even the in-laws froze, their cruelty faltering under the weight of his conviction. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. In those 3 words, she felt something she had long forgotten: protection, dignity, and the promise of safety. Tears welled in her eyes, not of pain, but of the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely abandoned. Daniel stepped closer, his shadow towering over the trembling brother-in-law. "You will not touch her again," he growled, each word laced with unshakable resolve. "Not while I'm standing." The in-laws exchanged uneasy glances. Their cruelty thrived in numbers, in the silence of others. But here stood a man who was not afraid, a man whose very presence stripped away their false power. Slowly, Daniel turned to Eliza. His voice softened, though it still carried strength. "You're coming with me." The world seemed to stop. Eliza blinked, stunned by the words. No one had ever offered her a way out. No one had ever reached into the pit of her despair and pulled her toward the light. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no sound came out. Daniel extended his hand, rough and calloused from years, of labor yet steady and sure. "No more tears, no more pain. You've suffered enough." Her heart raced, torn between fear and trust. She glanced at her in-laws, their faces twisted with rage and disbelief, then back at the rancher whose eyes held no judgment, only fierce protection. The choice stood before her like a chasm, and for the first time in years, she dared to take a step forward. The crowd gasped as Eliza moved toward him, her hand trembling as it reached for his. Daniel grasped it firmly, pulling her to his side, shielding her from the eyes that had feasted on her misery. In that single moment, the chains of her torment cracked, but as they turned to leave, a voice rang out from behind, sharp, bitter, and venomous. "You think you can just take her? She belongs to us. She'll never escape what we started." Daniel stopped, his back rigid, his hand tightening around Eliza's. His eyes darkened, and without turning, his voice cut through the night like steel. "She belongs to no one but herself. And if any of you try to touch her again, you'll answer to me." Silence followed. The crowd dispersed slowly, their courage drained, their cruelty exposed. Eliza clung to Daniel's side, her tears falling freely now, not from despair, but from the fragile hope of freedom. And as the rancher led her away into the night, the flames of vengeance still burned behind them, unseen but waiting, a storm yet to come. The night was heavy with silence as Daniel led Eliza away from the farmhouse, their footsteps crunching softly over the dirt road. The torches behind them flickered out one by one, but the echoes of her in-laws' venomous voices clung to the air like poison. Eliza gripped Daniel's hand tighter, her body trembling as though the darkness might swallow her whole. For years, she had been trapped, forced to believe she was powerless. But with every step beside him, she felt something stirring within her chest. A fragile flame, flickering but alive. Daniel's horse snorted and stamped as they approached. He helped her mount, steadying her gently before swinging up behind her. As the animal carried them away from the hateful eyes that had haunted her for so long, Eliza let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. For the first time, the farmhouse shrank behind her, and with it, the prison that had broken her spirit. Yet even in her fragile relief, fear gnawed at her. "They won't let me go," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "They'll come after me. They always do." Daniel's arms tightened slightly around the reins, his voice steady and low. "Then they'll find I don't scare easy." Eliza turned her head slightly, studying him in the moonlight. His jaw was set, his eyes sharp, but beneath the hardened exterior she sensed something else, something she couldn't name yet. He wasn't just fighting for her. He was fighting against something buried inside himself, too. The ranch house loomed in the distance, standing solitary against the rolling plains. When they reached it, Daniel dismounted first, then lifted Eliza gently down. The wooden porch creaked beneath their weight as he led her inside. The warmth of the hearth greeted her, flickering shadows across the modest room. Eliza's eyes darted nervously around as though expecting her in-laws to burst in and drag her back. Daniel noticed. He closed the door firmly behind them, bolting it. "You're safe here," he said, his voice carrying the kind of certainty that left no room for doubt. Eliza sank into a chair near the fire, her hands trembling in her lap. For a long while, silence filled the room. Daniel busied himself with the fire, tossing another log into the flames. Finally, she spoke. "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why did you step in?" Daniel paused, staring into the flames as though the answer might rise out of the burning wood. "Because I've seen cruelty before," he said at last, "and I swore I wouldn't stand by and watch it again." She frowned, studying him. "You don't even know me." He turned, his gaze steady on hers. "I didn't need to. I saw enough." Her throat tightened. No one had ever looked at her like that before. Not as a burden, not as a broken thing, but as someone worth saving. Tears welled again, but this time they weren't born from despair. Still, fear lingered. "They won't give up," she whispered. "They'll come for me, and when they do—" Her words trailed off, heavy with dread. Daniel stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the floor. "Then let them come," he said firmly. "They'll learn what happens when you hurt a soul that's already been through hell." The conviction in his voice steadied her trembling heart. For the first time in years, she didn't feel entirely alone. But outside, in the dead of night, a pair of eyes watched from the shadows. Her brother-in-law stood hidden among the trees, his face twisted with fury. The humiliation of being defied burned deep. He would not allow her to slip away so easily. Back inside, Daniel handed Eliza a blanket. "Rest," he told her. "You've carried enough pain. Tonight you'll sleep without fear." She hesitated, then whispered, "What about you?" He shrugged, pulling a chair near the door. "I'll be right here." That night, as Eliza lay curled beneath the blanket, her body finally loosening from years of tension, Daniel sat watch, the firelight casting sharp lines across his weathered face. His eyes never closed. Memories haunted him too, faces he couldn't save, voices lost to the past. Protecting Eliza wasn't just about her, it was about redemption. The first light of dawn crept over the plains, painting the horizon in pale gold. Eliza stirred, her eyes opening to a world that suddenly looked different. She sat up slowly, blinking at the sight of Daniel still seated by the door, his presence steady and unyielding. For the first time, she didn't wake to scorn or cruelty. She woke to safety. But the peace didn't last. By midday, dust rose in the distance. Daniel saw it first from the porch, a cluster of riders approaching, their horses kicking up clouds. His jaw tightened. "They're here," he muttered. Eliza rushed to the doorway, her face paling at the sight. "It's them," she whispered, fear returning like a cold blade against her chest. Daniel stepped outside, shoulders squared, his presence as immovable as the earth itself. As the riders drew closer, her in-laws' faces became clear, twisted, with rage and determination. The brother-in-law at the front sneered. "You think you can steal from us?" he shouted. "She's ours. She'll always be ours." Daniel's voice thundered across the open air. "She is not yours. She never was. And today, this ends." The riders pulled their horses to a halt, circling like predators. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. Daniel stood alone, unflinching, the sun casting a golden crown over his shoulders. "Walk away," Daniel warned, his tone like steel. "You've done enough damage." But the brother-in-law only laughed bitterly. "You think you can stand against us all? You're just one man." Daniel's gaze hardened. "One man is enough when he's fighting for what's right." The words rolled across the plains, striking deeper than any weapon. For a moment, even the riders hesitated. They weren't used to being challenged. Eliza stepped forward, her voice trembling but filled with a newfound strength. "I'm not yours to control. I'm not your prisoner anymore." Her words broke the silence, shaking the chains they had bound her with for years. Her in-laws sneered, spitting threats, but the power in their words had begun to crumble. The more Eliza stood tall beside Daniel, the weaker their cruelty became. Daniel's hand rested near his holster, though he hadn't drawn a weapon yet. His true weapon was his presence, his unshakable resolve. "If you want her," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "you'll have to break me first." The brother-in-law's face twisted with fury, but as he looked into Daniel's unyielding eyes, he saw something that sent a chill through him. A man who had nothing to lose, a man who would fight to the last breath. Silence stretched long and heavy. The riders shifted uneasily, their bravado cracking. One by one, they turned their horses, muttering curses but unwilling to test the rancher's resolve. Finally, even the brother-in-law spat in the dirt and pulled his reins, retreating with a glare that promised vengeance as the dust of their departure faded. Eliza's knees gave way and she collapsed into tears, not of despair but of release. Years of pain poured out in sobs, and Daniel knelt beside her, steadying her shoulders. "You're free now," he said softly. "They can't hurt your soul anymore." Her tears soaked into his shirt as she clung to him, not just to the man who saved her, but to the promise of a life she thought she'd never have. The rancher's words echoed again, not as a shout this time, but as a vow. Enough is enough. And with that, Eliza knew the chains of her past were broken forever. The plains quieted after the riders disappeared, leaving only the whisper of wind through the grass. But inside Eliza, storms still raged. Years of scars didn't vanish in a single night. She trembled as Daniel guided her back inside, his hand steady on her arm. By the firelight, she sat motionless, staring into the flames as though searching for pieces of herself she had lost. Daniel poured water into a tin cup and placed it before her, but his voice was what anchored her. "You don't have to fear them anymore," he said. "They may return, but they'll never find you the same." Her lips quivered. "I don't know who I am without the chains they wrapped around me. They took everything." Daniel knelt beside her, his eyes level with hers. "Not everything. They couldn't take your soul. They tried, but it's still here. And that's enough to rebuild." Her tears fell freely, but for the first time, they were cleansing, not crushing. She looked at him, searching for the truth in his words, and found it there, solid, unwavering. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Every day they told me I was nothing. I believed them." Daniel's jaw tightened, his voice firm. "Then listen now. You are not nothing. You're stronger than they ever wanted you to know. Tonight you stood in front of them and claimed your freedom. That takes more courage than most men will ever find. The silence between them grew heavy, not with despair, but with meaning. Eliza's breath shook as she absorbed the weight of his words. Slowly, a spark ignited where once there had only been ash. Daniel reached for her hand, rough and calloused, but steady. You don't have to walk this alone anymore. Not as long. As I'm here. Her gaze fell to their joined hands. She realized he wasn't offering rescue. He was offering strength, a chance to stand on her own feet again, and deep inside, her spirit rose to meet that chance. The night deepened, and the fire burned low, but something new burned in Eliza. She straightened in her chair, her shoulders no longer bent beneath invisible weight. Her eyes still shimmered, with pain, but behind them, resolve began to shine. Daniel studied her quietly, knowing the journey ahead would not be easy, but in her face, he saw what he had been waiting for, a soul refusing to stay broken. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft, but firm. You were right. Enough is enough. I won't let them own me anymore. Daniel's chest tightened with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. As dawn painted the horizon again, the ranch stood tall against the golden light. Eliza stepped onto the porch, inhaling the morning air, and for the first time in years, it didn't taste like fear. Daniel stood beside her, silent, his presence steady as the earth itself. The past still lingered, scars etched deep, but the future stretched wide and open. Together, they faced it. Two souls scarred by life yet, unbroken, bound not by chains, but by courage. And in the silence, Eliza whispered the words that sealed her freedom. No more chains, no more fear. Enough is enough. The wind carried her vow across the plains, scattering it to the skies like a promise that would never again be broken. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit the like button. Share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Legacy Ignited for more powerful stories every week. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories alive. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.